So I'll briefly be giving a talk today about first the approach in my work, and then go into more detail with the installation first encounters, where I'll also show a short video excerpt of my work. I hope the internet connection will be okay. And then talk about the platform that I'm currently founding, which is called the Encounters Lab. And then, of course, if we have some time for questions, I'm very happy to take them. So over millennia, the behavioral movement patterns of species around the globe had been geared to each other, producing somewhat of an equilibrium. Now, with anthropocentrically induced changes in climate, however, those precisely tuned patterns start to shift, affecting rhythms in fauna and flora. Even minuscule alterations in phenology can cause cascading effects in the local ecosystem, and these now, due to globalization and the flows around the planet, manifest and visualize in the global ecosystem, producing consequences that we have trouble to causally connect and absorb. So patterns of movement become patterns of encounter. For example, if budburst happens a day later every year, will it still coincide with the bee? Or when migrating storks set off to their journey just a couple of hours earlier, the odds of meeting other flocks of bird or different species on their way are high. So what happens in this moment of encounter? And what consequences might this hold for the birds and eventually for human life? But first of all, what do we actually understand by this term encounter? And what happens in this one complex moment in which the human might not even be present? On a philosophical note, in 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari proposed the concept of a rhizome as a metaphor for knowledge and learning, and as an alternative to the common metaphor of a hierarchical ordered structure. So the rhizome, being designed as a structure without beginning or end, is being defined via its relation and connection path between the individual elements. So they apply this idea to the biological narrative of the orchid and the wasp, describing how they're both defined via the relation to the other, and how they're encountering the orchid plus wasp produces something entirely new that is more than just the sum of its parts. So what's essential here is that the encounter between these two entities create a new reality. The wasp is being defined via its relation to the orchid and vice versa, producing a mutual dependency of being. According to Donna Haraway, every kind of coming together, such as, for example, two people meeting, produces an emergent opportunity out of which other kinds of life may be cobbled together. And the possibility for something to exist on this planet that really wasn't there before emerges out of encountering. So with two species meeting that would have not met under natural circumstances, two worlds are somehow being cobbled together by human hand, and the possibility for the emergence of new life is being multiplied. An ecological momentum of its own has been generated that evolved out of our history of anthropogenic impact on biological processes. So, as you very well know, we are currently experiencing a global redistribution of life on Earth, with species shifting their distributions across all ecosystems in response to recent and ongoing climate change in order to be able to track their preferred climatic conditions. So this now creates novel species interactions as species that evolved in isolation from one another now come into contact for the first time. So in the age of the Anthropocene, via the arm of climate change, the knock-on effects triggered the reconfiguration of species communities on a global scale and result in restructuring processes of entire ecosystems. So since the common approach of explanatory ecology here somewhat is limited in its effect, I'm looking into anticipatory ecology, which in my understanding intends to predict the effects of climate change on species, communities, and ecosystems. And this was the moment when I first reached out to Greta, and she then introduced me to this whole world of species redistribution ecology. My main research question in my project is, what happens if two species that have never interacted before are now going to encounter due to anthropocentrically changed climatic circumstances? What if you would push the consequences through the entire chain of trophic interactions? What if an encounter taking place in one end of the world, but the repercussions ripple back and reach around the globe? Or what if anticipatory ecology meets speculative design? So through an interdisciplinary approach of combined forces, speaking of not facts versus fiction, but much rather facts with fiction, the ecological momentum generated by first encounters unleashes a chain of consequences for human lives. When shifts in foundation species can initiate cascading effects on other species, which then act as biotic multipliers of climate change. So starting in the transformation of local ecosystems, consecutively impacting the global biosphere, generating impacts which surface in human systems of trade, food security, geopolitical policies, and jurisdictional structures, as well as we've now seen, human health. So affecting the very architecture of our systems, these impacts call for the restructuring of our societies and shared spaces, raising questions of multi-species habitats. The research and design project First Encounters tells the stories of species encounters building on empirical data of documented species range shifts, which I developed in close exchange with scientists from the fields of evolutionary ecology, animal migration, and marine biology. So the investigation drafts scenarios of documented and potential first encounters and envisions consequences for human lives and systems through the lens of speculative design. So it's a project to visualize the entanglements of the planet's ecosystem with human-made structures and the vast complexity of trophic cascades. The project seeks to unravel some of this ecological complexity that lies beyond our grasp. So by transforming empirical facts into an emotional reality, the project's mission is to make the consequences we set off with our own actions a spatial experience. The stories in my project cover 3 typologies of species range shift that surface in scientific data, which are a poleward shift on land in the Arctic, upwards in elevation in the air in Central Europe, and into cooler waters in the oceans of Australia. So I chose these areas because they depict 3 ecosystems responding to climate change faster than the global average, producing shifts in habitat that can already be observed today. So these are the 3 examples that I explored in my installation. The project speculates about potential consequences for us humans and drafts scenarios for futures that are full of uncertainty. So no one knows exactly what these shifts in species distribution will trigger in detail, but what we know for sure is that the dynamics generated by first encounters unleash a chain of consequences for human lives. So against this backdrop, the craft of speculation now reaches a new dimension, as speculation might come just as true as anything else. Since most of the facts are already out there, but we can't grasp them due to the level of abstraction, in my project, I want to bring it a step closer into present day by making potential consequences tangible and emotionally relatable, asking what would it feel like? So using speculative design as a means to make other futures imaginable. Upon the encounter of 2 species, many possible impacts may evolve, as each step in the trophic cascade produces yet a multiplicity of options of how the ecosystem could react. So I will now be showing the encounter of polar bear and grizzly bear, which is an encounter that has already been documented in Arctic Alaska, and I will also show some potential impacts. So here's a short video clip of the installation of my work, and it also has sound, so I hope you can hear okay.
Welcome, human. In normal circumstances, the paths of these 2 species never cross. Polar bears traditionally hunt far out in the Arctic Ocean, walking miles over frozen sea in the dark winter months. They grab adult seals which come up to breathe through air holes for prey. Grizzlies live far from the Arctic hunting grounds of their polar cousins. They sleep through the frozen winter when polar bears are hunting on the ice. In summer, they catch Alaskan salmon out of rivers. These worlds are now becoming intertwined. As permafrost is thawing, grizzlies wake earlier from their hibernation and heading north, venture deep into polar bear country. Polar bears, meanwhile, are heading in the opposite direction. Each year, as the sea ice breaks up earlier, they swim back to land. While polar bears are looking for food on land, grizzlies head north, following food as well. An encounter is inevitable. The polar bear is looking for food on land, which is to him new territory. Polar bear and grizzly become competitors on the same ground on their search for food. The polar, historically only roaming on ice, struggles with pathogens in the soil, to which its immune system is not adapted to. The polar bear gets sick and soon after dies, exhausted from the warmer temperatures, lacking the desperately needed calories he usually gains from fatty seals. Without the polar bear, the seals now thrive, lacking their main predator. The abundance of seals leads to a fight for food within the species, resulting in a decline in fish populations. Fishermen haul empty nets in their fishing areas. With less fish to catch, increasing pressure is put on fishing rights for the remaining fishing territories, resulting in territorial conflicts in the geopolitically already tense situation in the Arctic. Upon encounter, the polar bear interbreeds with the grizzly, producing fertile offspring. The hybrid bear shows behaviors of both species. Being better adapted to the climate change landscape and the Arctic tundra, the species prevails against both its ancestors. Taking over the diet from the grizzly parent, the hybrid bear feeds on Alaskan salmon, leading to a change in the local ecosystem communities as the freshwater salmon population declines. Indigenous communities struggle to maintain their spiritual relationship to the species and are changing their songs, stories, and traditional practices to match the vanishing populations of salmon.
So this idea that one encounter produces multiple impact narratives also manifests in the spatial concept for the project, integrating this cascade of ecological momentum into its floor plan. So as a spatial installation, the project leads the story around the visitor to reconnect cause and effects and to bring the human back into the relations to the dynamics that he set off. So with the entrance of the human into this arena of encounters and thus into the story, the dynamics are kicked off and the human is now left to observe as this cascade unrolls. Impacts travel through the exhibition space as they travel around the globe, connecting remote encounters with direct tangible impacts. So as human species, we are standing in the center of consequences with observer status only, and we understand that the only option left now is to adapt to the changes that we initially have set off. So just as a brief overview, the other stories that I tell in my project are hoverfly encountering alpine excenter at the pass Col de Breteuillet at the French-Swiss border, where the hoverfly migration coincides with the upward shift of the alpine excenter, which is a small bird that lives above the tree line, which now shifts its year-round habitat even higher due to global warming. So on the one hand, the impact of less hoverflies reaching their destinations in Spain may reflect in harvest losses, while impacts in the local ecosystem could cause soil erosion and landslides as plants remain unpollinated and dead plants can no longer hold the ground together. So impacting tourism in the building sector as hotels suddenly stand in red zones for avalanches. Meanwhile, in the oceans of Australia, during previous heat waves, manta rays followed plankton into cooler waters where they're confronted with alien parasites. They frequent coral reefs inhabited by smaller creatures to be removed of their parasites. Now, however, with the coral reefs being dead and deserted, however, they cannot get rid of their parasites and get sick. In traditional medicine, mantas are valued for the properties, but what if substances gained from infected mantas were transferring the disease from the fish onto the human? Is a new zoonosis being born? So on a philosophical level, the project asks what it means to be human today and questions the place of the human being in contemporary global ecosystem. And I want to highlight that the human being is indeed part of the biosphere, while also not grasping its complexity and connections. So it's necessary to implement this interconnectedness of species into our human way of thinking by crafting a visualization that speaks our human language, which is a very visual way of storytelling. So building onto that work of first encounters is the Encounters Lab, which is an interdisciplinary research-led project that spans science and speculative design to communicate potential consequences for our human lives and systems. So as a platform, it serves as a space to speculate about possible impacts in ecosystems and human systems, which were initiated by the reconfiguration of the Earth species communities following climate change. The mission of the platform is to reestablish cause-consequence connections that got lost in complexity. Functioning as a research tool, not in a scientific sense, but in the understanding of speculative design by applying investigative methods to anticipate various first encounters. So by investigating multiple potential futures, the project's mission is to train us to navigate uncertainty as a way forward in this new normal. As a long-term goal, the lab aims at including other species in processes of geopolitical decision-making and to foster visions of a multi-species society by exploring exactly these planetary interspecies dependencies. So in my position as a designer, I have the power to bring together various stakeholders to produce a fruitful debate on this urgent topic, and as well as to include a wider audience. By working via the axis of visual storytelling, this makes empirical research tangible and accessible and transforms scientific evidence into emotional realities. So right now, the project First Encounters is on show at the Nature Loves Technology exhibition in the Dutch Innovation Pavilion in Almere in the Netherlands as part of Floriade, and is also part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Applied Arts Vienna and has been awarded the Planet Love Prize. So I'm very happy to stay in close contact and to collaborate with your institution. And I'm very happy if any one of you felt like this project particularly resonated with you and you would like to connect or participate in the Encounters Lab. So please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. And I'm very happy. If you have any questions, I'd like to take them now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Sophie. I think it's, it's such an important, pervasive issue, this redistribution of life on Earth. So it's fantastic to see really innovative ways of communicating and engaging and having, starting these discussions about what this means for people all around the world. And I thought your visuals were just fantastic, and I love that spinning wheel with the options. That's a wonderful communication device.
Thank you.
We will open it up to questions, and I'd particularly like to invite any students that are online to ask questions first. So there's probably not too many of us here. You could probably just flick your camera on or start speaking if you'd like, or use the raise hand function, or if you've got your video on, just stick your hand up. But yeah, thank you very much for that, Sophie, and we'll open it up to questions. If there's no questions from students in particular, anybody else is welcome to jump in. I've got questions, but would be good for if anybody else would like the opportunity. Julia?
So thanks, Sophie. That was really interesting. I think my question is more curiosity. Is this something that you see being presented in different museums and expanding to other species interactions into the future?
Yes, I mean, I very much like that it's being displayed in museums, showing that there's such a great interest in the work and also in the topic of species redistributions. And this is just very satisfying to observe that it's being taken on from various sides with such great enthusiasm. So it's like from the scientific side, but then also from speculation side, from design, from futurists all along. So this is really nice for me as a feedback to say, yeah, the time is right to present this. And of course, this is just the start of everything. I feel like even after years of research now, that there's so much more that this needs to evolve and develop, which is why I'm founding this platform now and this lab to be able to dig deeper and to reconnect with people that are already into this topic, to make the most out of it and to show how much of relevance it is to our futures and futures for all of us. Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's really confronting to see it like that. And
thank you. Yeah.
The implications into the future. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Ellie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, Sophie. That was really fascinating, great visuals. I was wondering if you'd done much work on the reception of your work and whether you look at audience reaction and impacts and what it might change in the audience perception. And have you done any research of that kind?
Only in the sense that I've been sneaking around exhibitions and observing people watching my installation, which was very helpful as well. But of course, for example, during the project was on show at Dutch Design Week in Eindhoven the previous fall. So this was a full 10 days of me being present, talking to people and really getting on a deeper level in conversations and seeing how it's being taken on. So I'm very interested in ways of developing this further and incorporating the feedback of how installations work. What I've been observing so far and what was really interesting to see is that it's being taken on by people of various age, various backgrounds, and also no matter if they speak the English language or not, like the immersive exhibition has a voiceover in English. So the visuals and just seeing the images is also sometimes enough. And also from kids to grandmothers, like they've all been in the exhibition and perceiving it. So this is very interesting for me to see and also to be able to develop it further. So yeah.
Could I ask a follow-up? Music. I'm trying to think back to and whether you had music as well as the voiceover. Is that something that you've put much thought into? What accompanies, in terms of the oral component of your work?
So there's no music in terms of like a score or something, but it has the voiceover as being a spoken voice, and it has like atmospheric sounds as backdrop to make it more immersive. So like the bears and birds and all of the animal sounds, producing like a small backdrop of visual and acoustic soundscape, yeah, but no music as such. No.
Thanks.
Have we got any other questions? I know we've got a couple of other artist type people online. So are there any questions around that at all? No. Yeah, the questions that I had were around audience reaction as well, and just wondering if you'd been able to evaluate, how people responded. So yeah, but I can see how it would be a really good tool and approach to use to cross over, cultural and language differences as well. So really useful in that context. Have we got any other questions about the design elements or the communication aspects, anything like that? Roland, you've got a question?
Hi, yes, something which is perhaps a little bit trickier to portray, but it was in fact one of your early examples, was where traditional encounters are broken, such as the issue of bloodburst timing, things like that. Is that a more challenging thing to construct a presentation about, that severing of existing connections?
I mean, of
Last
course,
encounters lab, maybe.
yeah.
To correspond with your first encounters lab.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it works both ways, right? So there's first encounters being species being brought together, but then at the same time, existing relationships are being broken up, and are they being replaced by anyone else, or how, like, as we know, the species have very specific places in their ecosystem as like connected with very specific functions, producing these ecosystem services. So what will happen if these species now cannot interact in the way any longer that they have been for so long? And this, of course, it's going both ways, first encounters and, let's say, these broken encounters. I like the term. It's really putting it in a nutshell. I think it's important to not forget about broken encounters, but I'm more interested in the first encounters as these unprecedented moments that have not yet been brought together, to see what's evolving out of it. But yes, we cannot forget, of course, about previous interactions that either being replaced or being adapted, like in a way.
I think that, I mean, the approach that you're taking is certainly very striking, because you're looking at that ripple out effect from a new first encounter, and obviously, in fact, in those ripple effects will be a lot of these broken encounters, such as, for example, you were talking about the effects on, in your first example, the effect on fisheries and things like that. So that you certainly, in the ripple out part, you're seeing a lot of the broken connections in the previous intact ecosystem.
Right.
But, and then certainly it provides a nice focal starting point to the first encounter has that advantage of this novelty, because in fact, often novelty that no one in the whole of human history has actually encountered, something that's completely novel in the whole evolutionary sense as well. Anyway, thank you very much for the presentation today.
Thank you so much for your input. Yeah,
thank you for that question, Roland. And that's something that we find from a research aspect as well. And I see that Jonathan's just put his hand up, but from a research context, and Marie as well, it's easier and more common to document these first encounters than it is to document the last of something. And we're seeing those first encounters first before we're seeing the last encounters. But I'll hand over to Jonathan and then to Marie. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Very nice talk, Sophie. It was really interesting and inspiring talk. I had a question about the people reactions. Did you see any kind of general reactions in terms of hope or fatality towards this biodiversity redistribution? Like, do people see it as something positive or negative in general, or do you have this kind of feedback from the general public?
So yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's very interesting because in my work I try, like, very much of the work of communicating climate change is very much about also communicating the morals attached with it. So in my work I try not to go too far down that route. I'm interested in showing adaptations and change in general. And so a lot of people sometimes ask me if it's hopeless or if it's like a doom and gloom thing, because of course we're also facing some severe impacts and some very dark stories. But I'm not interested in just saying all is bad or all is good, but much rather saying, and now I've like split my mind right now and going different directions. Just let me gather my thought again. I'm not focusing on the morals too much. In a way, I'm interested in showing the dynamics that are being generated. And let's say, even if we would hold all emissions, all CO2 emissions as of today, the impacts and the momentum of its own that we generated over centuries will still continue to evolve and will still go on for centuries much longer. So I'm interested in showing how these dynamics are working, making us understand what dynamics are out there, and to make us play along now to the dynamics that we initially generated but cannot understand any longer. So we now need to adapt and see and in a way make a multi-species society work for a future of all of us on this planet. So let's say, I don't know if it's hopeless to stop climate change, but this is not the idea this project is about, more about the dynamics that we generated and say, okay, what can we make out of it now? Like taking a more constructive point of view. And so it's very much, I've been working with this cascade graphic for some time now, and I very much like it in terms of how it's navigating the path between enough complexity and enough simplicity to kind of convey just enough to make us aware of the complexity, but to still be able to wrap our head around some of it. And so portraying this aspect of the gears, ecosystem gears, how everything is interconnected and how each decision, each of the interactions then open or close possible paths for other interactions that will follow up. So this trophic cascade. And it just really shows how directly ecosystems and local and global ecosystems are connected with our human-made structures that we sometimes perceive separate from nature. So I really like it in terms of how it's connected and how it just like focuses on this ripple-on effects and the dynamics generated.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Marie, you had a question?
I did. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Thank you for that presentation, Sophie. So very, very inspiring, so beautiful. I had a couple of questions, but I'll start with one that kind of follows on from your discussion with Jonathan there, which is about this wonderful imaginative complexity that you kind of offer in the gears. You can move them around and you can follow all sorts of potential trajectories, and they're imaginative without that kind of judgment that you were talking about, not that moral judgment about this is a good or a bad, but this is a maybe, right? Mm-hmm. And so I wondered which groups, who do you imagine or hope might engage with it, and how? What do you think those groups might do with all of this imaginative potential?
So sometimes people ask me if it's all about creating awareness and asking people if they're like making people familiar with the science behind it. So I would say initially, as a basic step, this is part of it to get it out there and to communicate that this actually exists, because a lot of people, for example, that would not read a scientific report were easier to approach this type of knowledge in the setting of an immersive visual installation. So it does communicate to various different groups of people, and thus make it also a more democratic access to this type of science behind it. but I would say it's more than just raising awareness. Also, especially in this age of hyper awareness that we're almost in, I would say that crafting and the craft of imagination in itself sort of becomes a job of its own in this field here. So to formulate notions of potential futures and just to put out that there is a multiplicity of futures that are an option, so to say. There isn't just one straight path, but there is many, and we can choose in a way by choosing actions and paving the path towards it. But firstly, to formulate this idea of what this future might be is becoming more and more of a job, I feel like, in itself. So this is why I use a lot of this world building. World building also sums it up very nicely. So of course I would like to see stakeholders like policymakers and governmental side as well showing interest in this kind of work to actually participate in making this a reality, and and start moving into action in a way. So
I've got a follow-up if I may.
Sure.
But I'm happy to open it up, Greta, if there's other people waiting.
Oh, we've got time, go for it.
So I've really connected with that research potential in it, that imaginative research potential, not just the awareness raising too, which is why I asked about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then the other question is a researcher focused question. So you describe yourself as a multidisciplinary researcher. You come from design and you've been engaging with marine biologists and a range of other, let's call them hardcore scientists, even though that's just to kind of create a ripple of the group that we're talking to. What did you learn in the process of doing that as a researcher yourself? And what developed in the design practice, this kind of design research practice for you that you think we might be able to learn from?
You mean what, like observing the conversation with scientists, or what exactly?
Yeah. So what was it like to work with a range of different disciplines, but also what changed in the design research process, if anything, or how did that unfold, and how did working with scientists from other disciplines kind of inform and change and potentially enrich the design research process?
Yeah. So it was
feedbacks between the disciplines, Marie?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in Sophie's particular experience and what happened with her practice. Like, how is that developing as a research?
Yeah, so I've always been looking out to other disciplines, and our course, why we call it multidisciplinary, is also already inherently bringing together just different groups of expertise. So this is not completely new to my take on design and also to the school's approach. But particularly for this project, talking to researchers and scientists of very specific fields was very enriching for me. And it was very interesting. It coincided, some of it coincided with the pandemic, of course, and making it all digital. And this was very beneficial for me and for the project, because a lot of people suddenly were so much more available, and like it was easier to like get them on Zoom and just like interview for them and have 1.5 hours straight. And this was really, really interesting, so you could start discussing, okay, so what would this mean, for example, if this happens? And then, it's almost engaging in a, like inviting them to speculate as well, because I saw, of course, that the speculation part from the research side was a bit more hesitant, of course, because you guys all found more on facts and figures. So that was really, really interesting and really good for the project. And also just like, starting to speak the language of science in a way is like a thing of its own that comes over time, I think. But it was just really, really interesting for me. And I was very surprised on how, like, almost with open arms. I mean, it's very generalizing to say science, but from various scientific fields of expertise, people were reacting like very open armed to the term of speculation. And this really took me by surprise and really makes me happy, actually.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, do we have any last questions for Sophie before we thank her and sign off?
I also want to thank all the people that wrote in the talk and all the nice feedback that I got today. It's really nice to hear.
Yeah. Okay, well, we might finish up there, but thank you very much, Sophie, for joining us from the other side of the world to share some of your research. I think that was absolutely fantastic, and it is really, really pleasing to see such innovative ways of engaging the public and different people on this really important issue. So that was fantastic to see. Thank you very much too for the people that have joined us, particularly from overseas, different parts of the world. That was wonderful to see. And of course, everyone here in Hobart from CMS. So thank you very much. We will make that recording available. I've popped the details for Sophie's website and things in the chat there. But so go and have a look at some of her other work, and please take her up on her offer of connecting with any of you that are interested in engaging further with her work. So thank you very much, and yeah, we'll keep talking. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.